Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the NGA podcast, where we dive into all things gymnastics. Whether you're coaching, cheering from the sidelines, or a gymnast trying to reach that peak performance, this podcast is your go-to source for expert tips and inspiring stories that will empower you to excel. I'm your host, Rebecca Grady, and I'm here with my incredible co-host,
Dr. Ian Kreider.
Thomas Britton.
All right, so today we are talking men's gymnastics, and more specifically, the injuries that show up the most. So given the physical demands of the sport, it makes sense that wrists and shoulders are among the most vulnerable to overuse and injuries. So these two areas take a serious beating, and if we don't understand how to protect them, we risk burnout, long-term damage, and early exit from the sport. So let's talk about why these injuries happen, what to look for, and how coaches and gymnasts can start building smarter training habits to prevent them. Let's start with just the big picture. Why are wrists and shoulders so commonly injured in men's gymnastics?
Yeah, so I would say probably the one that's hardest on your wrists would be pommel horse. I don't think anybody's going to disagree with that one. And then probably the hardest on your shoulders, I would say probably rings. It kind of depends on skills that you're doing on different events, but rings is really tough on shoulders. P-bars can be too, especially if you're doing like a lot of upper arm landing skills, or if you're doing a lot of skills that take a lot of range of motion in the shoulders, like Diamondovs and Heelys and that sort of thing. So I would say those are the two that are the biggest injuries in my own gymnastics career. I tried not to train pommel horse in college, mainly because of my wrists, and I was terrible at competing pommel horse. I didn't mind training it, but competing it was just not my forte. I competed it once, I think, as a freshman. Then I asked my coach to never let me do that again, and he said okay. So I didn't have to do pommel horse the rest of my career. I did the other 5 events kind of on and off throughout the next 3 years. But yeah, so my wrist got bad enough, even without training pommel horse, my wrist got bad enough to where like junior year, I had to wear skids or like wrist braces on my wrists for most events, at least one wrist, if not both. And then towards senior year, the wrist braces kind of stopped working. So then I would tape my wrists and then put the wrist braces on top of it. And eventually by the end of senior year, my wrists were still hurting. And so now, even as a PT, although I know how to fix it, I just keep forgetting to because it's not part of my daily life anymore. But like my wrist only goes back like that far on both, and it's even worse on this side right now. If I press on them, they go a lot further. But as far as just being able to pull them back, yeah, my wrists do not move well. And so if I get a gymnast that I'm spotting and I have to kind of crank my wrist around to get her around, it gets mad at me. So wrists and ankles were kind of my biggest issues, but I certainly had some shoulder issues going from time to time. And we'll get into some funny stories, I'm sure, here. But Thomas, what'd you deal with?
Yeah, I mean, kind of the same thing as Ian. Shoulders and wrists are the biggest thing that you typically have to deal with as a male gymnast. The thing is, I feel like when you're younger, it's a little bit more on your wrists right from the beginning. Now your wrists are a little bit tougher then because they haven't been under the duress or like overuse from the years and years of doing gymnastics when you're younger, from like the age of like 5 to 10, I would say. Also, you're on mushroom, not pommel horse, right? Typically most of that time. And mushroom is just, it's all flat. It's all, swinging on the flat parts of the mushroom. So it's constant duress for your wrists. When you get older and you actually get onto the handles of the pommel horse, you get a little bit of give because you're not always training on the leather where your hands are going to be, or your wrists are going to be under that much like compression. Sometimes you can get like, flatter wrists when you're holding onto the handles, swinging on the handles. But even then, you're still doing a lot of work on the leather. But by that point, the skills you're doing are harder. They require more circles. You're heavier. You have more body weight on your wrists. It's just more stress on them anyway. I tried not to use skids when I got older, but at the same time, as we became junior, senior athletes in my gym, my coach did a pretty proactive job of trying to keep our wrists healthy and shoulders, which I'll get to as well. So we had like a rice bucket in our gym. I'm sure you guys have heard of gyms and guys using that before. Lots of different exercises to kind of strengthen your wrists so that way they would be a little bit stronger and can hold up to a little bit more stress when you are doing pommel horse for that long in a practice or at a camp or what have you, right? Shoulders for rings. Once again, I think it's a little bit more when you're younger because you're doing a lot of inlocates and a lot of dislocates. And maybe sometimes, especially when you're first learning them, you don't always have like perfect turnover swing technique where you can push the rings out as far as you need to. And you're just like, oh, yep. I'm just going to go from here and just turn it over. And it's just like tearing your shoulders up and you do that thing where like you catch in like an upside down pike. And you're just like, yep. That can't possibly be good for your human anatomy.
Literally dislocate your shoulders, right? Yeah.
Yeah, quite. Yeah, they just like pop out basically. But as you get older, you're doing less of those reps with the inlocates and dislocates because you don't need those reps anymore. And you get into like, Yamawaaki or Jonathan, which can be just as bad for your shoulders. But I feel like the potential to set up, I don't know what the word to use is, just set up for injury down the line is doing a lot of incorrect technique on inlocates and dislocates when you're younger. So like, especially with my athletes, I put so much time into proper turnover swing technique, making sure we're putting pressure on the rings going forwards and backwards. So that way they're actually going through the top with some pressure and pushing away from their shoulder. So it's more rotation around the shoulder rather than a catch right at the top. But yeah, my shoulders, we also did some prehab on, especially went to some camps. We got to learn from Blaine Wilson because, he was a great ring guy, lots of great strength, but he tore up his shoulders. Like he had multiple surgeries on each shoulder. And he told us about that story. And so, when we went to a camp and he gave us a whole bunch of like drills for shoulders and stuff. So I started doing that as I got into the end of my gymnastics career, and it helped. But I definitely feel the effects of some of those shoulder injuries more so today than I did when I was actually competing. Like every once in a while, like, my shoulders just get like real bad where I can't like nearly get them above my head sometimes if I do like some type of like lifting. And I attribute, some of that to probably not the one day of maybe not perfect lifting form, but probably the years of rotating around the rings. So
Yeah.
that's what I most commonly experience.
Yeah, Blaine, was it pec or bicep that he tore at like one of his later
I
meets?
think it was his pack.
Yeah, I remember watching that, and he's in that Maltese, and you just see his pec just like ripple, and you're like, oh gosh. Yeah, that's rough. Go ahead and look that up if you're bored.
Watch that happen.
That's right. Oh goodness. Yeah, and so the big difference between biggest differences between men's and women's gymnastics, right? Men's gymnastics would be 4 out of your 6 events. Number one, there's 6 events, not 4 events, which is just a lot more, right? There's a lot more stuff that you got to do, more skills you got to learn, and there's not a lot of carryover between the different events, like girls' events, right? Girls' events, we have 3 tumbling events. And then you have one event that they just threw in randomly, it seems like, where it's like, now you don't get to touch your feet. Whereas men's gymnastics, there's some swinging that's pretty similar. Rings, high bar, and P bars have some similar kind of swinging and tapping techniques and that sort of thing. But outside of that, you're learning different stuff on every single event, and it's a lot. It's a lot to have to learn. And so we have 4 events that you don't get to touch your feet on unless you accidentally do it. So the upper body gets beat up quite a bit if you're not strong, right? And men really don't gain that strength until later on in their teenage years. Men really don't put on muscle mass until 15 or 16 years old is when they really begin to put on muscle mass. And so that's why a lot of times when you see men's gymnastics, if you're watching higher level gymnastics and you have a young guy versus an older guy, right? Their gymnastics is going to look totally different. The skills that they do, you're going to see younger guys doing more twisting stuff on floor a lot of times versus double flipping stuff because they just don't weigh enough to hit the floor hard enough to make the springs bounce, right? A lot of times you'll see them doing more swinging things versus more strength moves on rings because their body just hasn't developed that strength yet. So there's some really big differences between men's and women's gymnastics, which is why you see the differences in injury rates and the types of injuries are different. Like women get wrist pain, but coming from the men's side of things and then treating a bunch of gymnasts that have wrist pain on the female side, it's not the same thing at all. There's wrist pain that they get with impact, but guys get, I don't know, we used to call them forearm splints. I don't know what that. Coming from a PT, I don't actually know what the official medical terminology is for it, but where it felt like shin splints, but it was in your forearms. And I remember like you finish pommel horse, right? You finish your turn on pommel horse, and if you would squeeze your hands really hard, it wouldn't hurt, and you could wait for like another couple of seconds, and then you'd release it, and you go, oh man, it would hurt so bad. And so we would get like these forearm splints, and I don't think I've ever heard of a girl getting that because they just don't spend that kind of time on their hands, especially time under load. So men's women's gymnastics really shouldn't even be called the same thing. The sports are so radically different.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's interesting you mentioned the event difference too from 6 to 4, but also in terms of muscle mass, you mentioned as well already. It's, I would say, in my opinion, much harder to have the perfect build for men's gymnastics and women's gymnastics because there's just different techniques that go into different events. So like chest flexibility is wildly important, as we know, in men's gymnastics, right? Like, being able to have a good swinging front position on horse, you have to be really flexible in your chest, and be able to pinch your shoulder blades in the back. Same for front swings on parallel bars. Certain strength skills on rings, like a Tkachev tap and release on high bar, right? You need really big chest flexibility for all those things. Once you get like to a certain point, you put on all that muscle mass, and you get much larger in your chest and your pectoral muscles. Like, that's much harder to maintain that flexibility because they get so tight. And so then it's like, okay, so you don't want muscle mass, so you can swing on all those other events, but then, you might be weaker on rings and you might be weaker on floor and vault because you don't have the same power. You're not trying to put on as much muscle. It's like, you have the longer, taller guys, the skinnier guys that are really good at swinging horse and swinging high bar, right? And then you have like those really jacked, buff guys that are good floor vault and rings, right? And P-bars because, they just have so much strength, they can hold all those strength skills. But then you watch them get on horse and they're like all shrugged up like this, they can't swing, right? So it's really hard to have a physique that's perfect for all 6 events, which is, why I think it's really rare that you see an NCAA men's gymnast do all 6 anymore. They have specialists, they have guys that just do certain events, and it's just because it's so hard to have all the exact things you need for those events. And even with the body mass, injuries come with that, like you were talking about hitting the floor so hard. It's great that you're doing big power skills like that, but that's a lot more, stress on your back, your ankles. All it takes is like one bad punch where you aren't squeezing your core muscles and your back is tweaked, and that's an injury that takes 6 months just to get over. So
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
I mean,
And they
it's
talk
tough.
whenever you listen to like strength and conditioning coaches for high level athletes, a lot of them will bring up the fact that, if they're training NBA players or NFL players, you go, all right, well, yes, we could get them to jump higher, but how much more do we need? Because every inch that they go up is another inch that they have to come back down again. And every mile per hour they gain in sprinting speed is another mile per hour they have to cut from, or they have to stop, or they have to, right? And so you kind of look at this, not that this is a huge deal among our youth athletes, right? But as you get on through the years, you just go, all right, how strong do you have to be? How powerful do you have to be? And at a certain point, I believe, and if he watches this, he can correct me. I think we're friends on Facebook, but I remember a story of Jason Gatson where they told him like stop doing strength and conditioning because he's one of these guys that just bulked up really, really easily, and they told him like, hey, it's like stop doing it. Like Jordan Jachev, he was just a master on rings, right? And I remember hearing stories about how he would work out like 6 hours a week because eventually he just got to the point where it's like, I'm as strong as I need to be. I'm as powerful as I need to be. I can do all the things I need. I'll gain 1 or 2 skills throughout this process of training 6 hours a week. But, at a certain point, do we kind of go, when is enough? For your 14-year-old kid, you've got plenty of room to spare. But as you start going up through it, you just kind of go, all right, when do you need to focus on strength and conditioning? And then when do you go, hey, let's focus on protecting you now?
So do you think there's a better way to do that when they're younger? Do you think there needs to be some major changes in how younger kids are trained because they haven't developed physically to do a lot of the events and skills?
Yeah, so, I think there for a while, like when I was growing up, going through gymnastics, and I'd love to hear kind of what Thomas experienced because he's kind of in between now and when I grew up going through gymnastics. So when I was growing up, women's gymnastics was drill, 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 drill. All right, we'll go ahead and do the skill, right? And then men's gymnastics was skill, 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 skills. All right, I guess we'll do a drill for that one, and then we'll come back to it, right? And I think at some point in time, that kind of met in the middle a little bit with men's and women's gymnastics, where I think men's gymnastics has a lot more drill and basics focus and building foundations, and women's gymnastics has gotten a little bit better, I think, at like, hey, it's probably finally time to throw the skill. Like, let's go ahead and do it. We don't need to drill everything to the nth degree. Let's do a few things, right? And then another thing that I've noticed with men's gymnastics here recently is, on the women's side, most of them have finally learned that you don't have to peak at the age of 15, right?
Yeah.
If your birthday falls on an odd year, it's still okay. You can still make it to the Olympics at the age of 18 or 19 or 26, right? And so they finally learned that, hey, you can still peak and you can still gain skills and get better later on in life. But for some reason, it seems like men's gymnastics is going the opposite way, where they're trying to peak kids super, super early all of a sudden. Like I've noticed maybe just the last like 7 to 10 years, maybe I've noticed that men's gymnastics is pushing really hard on, let's get an 11-year-old doing a double on floor. And you're just like, just because he can doesn't mean he should. And that was something I used to bring up with women's gymnastics all the time. It's like, just because they can withstand the punishment, just because they can recover from workouts like that, just because they can peak at the age of 15, is that the most ideal thing? And I think we're starting to run into that with guys.
Yeah, I agree. I also think a bigger reason, a more macro reason, also a more micro reason as well. There's different factors that go into it. The bigger one, I would say, is kind of just like sports in general, right? For example, NBA players aren't dunking like LeBron James like they did. They weren't doing that in the 60s. They weren't. The
Right.
athletes are getting better. It seems like the 40-yard dash at the NFL Combine is being broken every 2 to 3 years. Athletes are just getting better. And I think that's the same for men's gymnastics is, sometimes I'll be in my Instagram feed, right? And I'll see routines from like the really early 2000s or like even the 90s, 80s. And I'm like, I haven't trained gymnastics in 6 years. I could do those Olympic routines right now, right?
Right.
And but now I watch our U.S. athletes, our Chinese athletes, like I could never even dream of doing some of the things that they're doing. And it's just because the athletes are getting better. And so, like you said, just because that's the case, just because these younger kids, the athletes are getting better and they can, doesn't mean they should. There's a lot of weight that comes with that. It's great that you can do all those things, but the potential for injury and, long-term effects on your body goes way up when you're doing skills that major at that age when your body's not necessarily prepared physically. And then for the smaller reason, I would also just say like what it takes to get an NCAA scholarship at this point, because that's kind of the gymnastics path, right? There's no like NBA or NFL in gymnastics. It's college, and then are you good enough to go to the Olympics? All right. And so, colleges, they want you to have your routines basically ready when you get there. There's not a whole lot of skill development in NCAA as much as there is obviously there is some. That's not what I'm saying. Like, when you're younger, it's like, oh, let's go get new skills. Like, okay, you should have these routines when you get here. We can perfect them, and we're going to compose your routine the way you want so we can go win as a team and get the scores we need up on those events. And so I think they want you to have a lot of that ready by the time they're even scouting you. They want their teams, they're going to see 70% of you from like when you're a senior at their school. They want to see like 70% of that right now from you as a junior in high school. Like, what can you do right now? And we're just going to work with this and continue to develop it slowly. And so I think that's another reason. But yeah, going back to your first point, women's used to be, they do drills all day. And then summer's like, for like 1 month in August, all right, let's do new skills. And that's it. The rest of it is just conditioning and drills. And for us, we're like, let's just go do it. Let's go rip some stuff on the floor.
Right.
But, at least in my coaching philosophy, my guys now, I've tried to find that happy medium, I'm sure as everybody should try to, where, let's make sure, we're training the proper technique. But once we see that it's consistent already, let's go. We don't need to build consistency for 7 months, 8 months. We can do it for a month. If you feel like it looks ready, let's go and move on, because that way we can start developing the next step after that. And that's how we continue to develop into those bigger skills a little bit earlier than, sometimes it may take if you just drill a little bit too much.
With everyone starting their skills and doing all these advanced skills at a younger age, are you seeing more injuries? Have you seen that, Ian, in your practice?
Yeah. I mean, so I will say it's tough to get in front of the men's gymnastics side of things. A lot of my business, right? I do lots of strength and conditioning programs. It's lots of programming for the year and how to keep kids healthy and peaking at the right time and all that sort of thing. And I've eventually just had to cater it more towards women's gymnastics. And yes, I coach women's gymnastics, but obviously I have lots of experience in men's gymnastics as well. But the men's side of things is frustrating to me because they don't always ask for help. And I've been in front of men's gymnastics coaches before and talked to them, and they go, oh man, yeah, that sounds really neat. And then I never hear anything else from them. And I've tried to market to them, and it's a difficult thing to. And I don't know, I do know that there's this mindset behind men's gymnastics of, we're kind of going at it alone, right? The women's program is the women's program, and we're just sitting here trying to survive, and no one's helping us, and that sort of thing. When there are lots of resources to help men's gymnastics if you're willing to look for them. But yeah, so, and that's kind of a side note, but I would say yes, growing up, the injuries that I saw from younger gymnasts were usually like freak accident kind of things. They weren't necessarily like overuse injuries at that age, because we weren't training crazy hours. I occasionally trained crazy hours, like 26 hours or something in 1 week, but that was more of like a camp scenario. That wasn't anything consistent. Consistently, I probably trained 18 to 20 hours a week at my peak, right? Which is pretty common for men's gymnastics. There's not very many men's programs that are doing the crazy stuff like women's programs do, where it's like 30 to 35 hours a week. There might be one out there. I don't know of one. I'm sure there's somebody out there trying to do that. But most men's programs aren't doing that. And you would think out of the two programs, men's would do that because we've got 6 events instead of 4. But yeah, so I do see more overuse injuries in that younger population and more of the growth-related injuries like what we see on the women's side of the Sievers and Osgood Slaughters and Little League elbow and stuff like that. I am seeing a lot more of that on the men's side.
I speak a little bit differently. It's just purely from a coaching perspective and not from the medical field as Ian, but at least in my gym and what I see from, competitions, even things like that, where, I get to see a bigger sample size of, younger male gymnasts. Yeah, I agree. There's more overuse injuries. It's like, we're trying to get better as pommel horse as a country, so we love doing mushroom, pushing the incentive to do mushroom and pommel horse a lot more. So there's a lot of wrist injuries. Like a lot of little kids have their wrists taped like more than ever when I was a gymnast. And they're not all using like wrist guards or things like that, but they're definitely like a lot of taped wrists, like just for mushroom at like a level 3. I'm like, what are you doing in the gym, man? Like,
right.
Let's relax on those numbers a bit. But I would say also the injuries as they get older now, because of what we had talked about this last time around of, the athletes are getting better, so the skills are getting bigger. The ceiling for big injuries gets higher. And so, I personally had to deal with that with one of my athletes. He's doing this pretty big skill on floor. It's a big deal for his age. And, it happened to be an unfortunate injury. That comes with the territory of doing massive skills like that on floor, especially. Tumbling and vault is kind of the biggest ones, lower leg injuries and things like that when you're doing just massive tumbling and vaults. But then I think the incentive to also push strength on rings now too is causing some injuries and some shoulders and things like that. Constantly training on the belt or, with bands, doing like cross drills and Maltese drills and things like that. Like it's a lot of wear and tear in your body. Those are things that 99% of the population can't do. And we're training that for hours in a week, right?
Right.
And then are expected to just go do it. So I think it's just different types of injuries with the older guys, but more consistent injuries, or at least just pain. It doesn't have to be like an injury. It could be like, like a nagging pain or like a nagging overuse when you're younger now.
Since we're talking about the injuries, like what would you say are the most common wrist injuries that you have been seeing, or even depending on, age? Like, is there different ones that you see, younger versus older?
Yeah, most of the time with wrist injuries, they get all kinds of diagnoses, everything from gymnast wrist to Quervain's tenosynovitis to, all kinds of stuff, right? But for the most part, it's a range of motion issue. I think the big mistake that coaches make is they only focus on strength for the wrists. But if you think about, there's only one muscle in the human body that can push. All the other muscles pull, and that one muscle is your tongue, and so that doesn't help you in gymnastics. And so the only thing that muscles do is pull. And so if I'm trying to support my wrist, then it's range of motion that's needed, not necessarily strength. Now, obviously, we want to be super, super strong, right? But if you're trying to make the wrist stop hurting, most of the time it's because of range of motion. Because if my wrist only goes to here and I'm making it go to there every time I do a back handspring or every time I do a circle on pommel horse, and just over and over and over again, I'm going through that range of motion that I don't have. Well, eventually it's going to hurt, right? If I take my finger, there's nothing wrong with it. But if I take my finger and I go further than what it's supposed to go, eventually my finger is going to go, hey, quit it, you jerk. That hurts. And so the same thing happens to the wrist, and you might get away with it for one practice, but if you do it practice after practice and you push through that range of motion, then eventually it just kind of gives up and goes, all right, well, I'm just going to hurt all the time.
Yeah, like Ian said, it's just probably the most common one is just the wrist, because there's so many reps done of it every day. I would say this is not just a me thing. I'd say it's pretty common among men's gymnastics, at least when you're younger. You're doing more circles than you are rotations around the rings. I'd say that's most definitely a thing.
Yep. Because it's that thing, right? And it's that, like, I need my 3 circles in a row.
Yeah.
That's like the bit. And so you get there early to practice and you're doing, oh man, fell off. And you might do 50 before practice starts and not even think about it.
Right. And that's 50 more reps than you were expecting to do that day. And even when the kids don't have, 5 circles yet, or even 3, all right, go get in the bucket. We'll do circles in the bucket. Same thing.
injured in the bucket. Yeah.
What? I've never said to do that before.
Yeah. No.
Maybe definitely not even yesterday. Anyway, no. But that's just so many more reps and compressions on your wrist than you would on your shoulders. They might be more minor compressions and reps than they would be on the shoulders, on the rings or something like that, or on upper arm skills on parallel bars, like you said. It's just a lot more, and so it has the tendency to build up over time and kind of sneak up on you. And all of a sudden, your level 4 comes up to you. Oh man, my wrists really hurt. Can I tape them up? Sure. I'll tape them. I try not to use like wrist guards typically.
Yeah.
I feel like if I'm getting to a point where they want to use a wrist guard, I'm like, all right, let's just take a step back. We can take a day or two. You've already done like 500 circles this week. I think we'll be okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'd say that's probably the most common thing. Like I said, I don't think you really get into those big shoulder injuries until you're older. I
Right.
think it starts when you're younger, but like it's, I don't have a lot of younger athletes and I don't see a lot of younger like, oh, my shoulders hurt. That's only when you get older, but it's because of what happened when you're younger. But I would definitely say the wrist is probably the most common, like men's specific injury.
Yeah. Like, so to give people, and if they're not around men's gymnastics very much, and in like a level 10 routine, how many circles do you think they're doing just for the routine? What do you think?
You want me to answer? You should ask
Yeah.
Rebecca.
Yeah, that's right.
I would say probably 30 to 40 in a big set, maybe closer to 50 in an NCAA set.
Right. And that's just in one routine. And on the women's side of things, and we're always harping on the women about numbers. And we go, hey, they would, hopefully by now, they would never do 50 of anything basically in women's gymnastics. I'm trying to think about when that would be acceptable. Like running on vault, you might take 50 steps by the time you're done with vault rotation. But there's not a lot in women's gymnastics anymore where it used to be, yes, you're going to do 50 back handsprings in one day. And obviously all the lower back injuries and shoulder and wrists and stuff that came with that, right? Or you might do, I guess maybe like kips and casting. That might be the thing that you still get a lot of repetition on. But that's a pretty safe position. And there's not really compromised joints during those positions. It's pretty neutral stuff. You're not pushing it too hard. It's not like doing 50 Jaegers or something where you're just overextending everything. But pommel horse is, 30 to 50 circles just in your routine. And so how many, if you're thinking about just on competition day and all the warm-up turns that they're taking, they're probably doing 100 to 150 circles, maybe 200 circles at a competition. And we know that we do way more during practice than we do at a competition. And not only that, but if you're not up on the handles, if you're not on the pommels, then you're taking that wrist all the way pretty much to its furthest position, especially if you're not stretching your wrist like you need to. And so the amount of force at end range, which is the issue, that's what causes problems. Force at end range, the amount of times that you're hitting that on pommel horse is just astronomical.
What do you think coaches should be doing to get on the front end of this so we're not getting as many injuries? How do they need to balance the amount of skills they're doing and the conditioning, the strength, the rehab?
Yeah, so I make sure their wrists are moving as good as possible, right? And so my favorite stretch, a little difficult to show, but my favorite stretch, you can figure it out, it's pretty easy, is on hands and knees, palms down, fingers facing back towards you. But instead of just leaning back like what we typically do, instead bend the arms and straighten the arms. Keep the heel of your hand on the ground, and as you're in that position, just bend, straighten, just to get lots of force going through that wrist to stretch it and get it mobilizing, get it moving like it's supposed to. So that is the biggest thing. And then just moderation of workload, right? As a kid, like if we saw the big like red balls in front of target, and we would hop up and do circles on those, right? So we're showing off all the time, right? But the workload that you're putting on your gymnast is really important. So let's say that you do have a pommel horse day, and they did 300 circles that day between all the skills. And it's not just 300 circles most of the time. It's spindles and flares, and it's Russians, and it's travels and things like that. But you have to circle the whole time. And so let's say they do 300 circles that day. Well, is that the best day to do a bunch of upper bar stuff on parallel bars then? Or is that the best day to do super high impact Yurchenko work on vault that day on their wrist? Maybe not. And then maybe there's a day where, hey, you're up on the handles more, you're doing more scissor work. Maybe you're doing drills for circles where you're doing like body tightening stuff, where you're like in planks, popping your feet up off the ground. in all the directions. Maybe you're doing, Thomas, you ever do elbow circles with your kids?
I used to when I was younger, like in a bucket
Yeah.
on like a block. I don't have the space for it in my gym. Well, I also my bucket area is not as big as I need it to be to fit a block in there. But I know I used to do those, and I think they're great. Yeah.
Yeah. So elbow circles, working on huge extension through the chest and getting everything moving, and you're not having to be on your wrist. So there's some options on taking a little load off and being a little nicer to your wrist sometimes. So there are some options. There's not a ton. At the end of the day, you have to do a bunch of circles to get better pommel horse. And it's a tough thing for sure, but making sure the wrists move as well as they can, and then just moderating that workload and going, all right, today is like, here's our heavy day on pommel horse. That means tomorrow can't be our heavy day on pommel horse. And so maybe we do 45 minutes a day, but every other day we do 30 minutes a day on pommel horse, where it's just quick, get in, work like 3 skills, move on.
Yeah, I agree. Especially with the pommel horse, probably like we don't have to swing on the leather every day or on the mushroom every day. Especially for my older athletes, we have a day just for scissors. They don't even have to touch the leather, just stay on the handles all day that day. What I'll harp on just a little bit, this is a pretty specific example, but even though it's a specific example, this is something that every young male athlete and coach will go through, because everybody does a dislocate and inlocate on rings. Coaches, please, don't just let them chuck them. Make sure you're teaching really good turnover swings really early. I have even my rec class kids do push and pull swings just to begin to understand what the motion on each side of the rings is. We don't have to do the turnover on each side. I have to do the pull and the ring turn, but just push and pull swings. I teach it very early on, because then when I need to get to inlocates and dislocates, they know how to just go ahead and push and rotate over. Sometimes I'll see kids at competitions and they'll literally just like do a swing with their arms by the ears and just take it over, and you watch the shoulders and it gives you a visceral reaction, right? Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So although it is like example of just one skill, it's a skill that every male gymnast is going to do at some point in their life. So you might as well get ahead of it while you can, which is, I think, exactly what the question was. How can you get ahead of it? So just proper turnover swing technique. I can't harp on it enough. It's vital, vital, vital to keeping your shoulders intact when you get older.
Yeah. And then just a little like voice of reason from coaches is good. So just a really fun, terrible, terrible story from my college career. In high school, I competed it's called a gazogi to leaning. Okay. And if you know what that is, you're already going, oh gosh, that's terrible. So it's a double back holding onto the rings, and you catch in this position, like a skin the cat position. Right now, so growing up, I've already said on this podcast, I had an amazing coach that was super humble and did not know everything about gymnastics. And so we just every day we were just scouring code of points. We were going over to other gyms and learning what they did, and we were just all learning together. And so a little voice of reason would have been nice here, but it's like a C valued skill to do that gazogi to leaning, and there was no requirement to swing out of it. Now, technically, a leaning swing on rings is you swing in a skin the cat position, which again, why would we do this? But there's for that skill that you just had to end in a skin the cat. So technically you could, which is what I did, technically you could just go double back and just land in this position and then pull out of it and do something else. Yeah, and Thomas's face is the exact appropriate reaction for that line of thought there. So in high school, I did it for a little while just because I needed another C in my routine. Like I just needed to up my start value, needed that extra 3/10 and get the family group and all that, right? And so in college, I got to a point where I was like, man, another 3/10 would really help my routine and help my start value and help my lineup spot and all that. Man, I forgot about this, but let's put that gazogi to leaning back in there. And so now the difference between my college routine and my high school routine could not have been more different. I'm doing like 2 crosses. I'm doing some flange work in my routine. I'm doing giants. I'm doing all this stuff. And dumb brain, right now that I know all that I know now, and I didn't have a voice of reason coach helping me out with this one for some reason. But I just decided, well, I'll put that just at the end of the routine, and then I'll just kick out, do my double back, and be done, right? Because I didn't have any impressive dismounting on rings. So that was my idea. And so I get to that point, and I do my gazogi to leaning, and both shoulders I'm so tired at that point, right? And both shoulders just go just right through the rings, and I just I let go of the rings and like put my arms down, and it looked bad enough. Like the athletic trainers who were on the other side of the gym ran to the rings because they saw me do it. Right? They're like, "Are you okay?" I was like, I think. Yeah, I think I'm okay. So only by the grace of God, quite literally, did I not just dislocate both of my shoulders. Now, I probably do have a labrum tear. I don't know if it was from that, but I probably have a labrum tear, at least in my left shoulder, just because of men's gymnastics. But yeah, so a little voice of reason coming from your coaching staff is a great idea on routine development, and hey, this is a good idea to do, or that is a skill from the 1950s that should not be done anymore. It just is still in the code of points for some reason.
That sounds awful. Hey, but that's a good transition to the shoulder injuries and which ones are the most common and what causes them.
That's not the most common, nor is that what causes them the most, but
Hey, it's a good transition.
something
though.
like it. That's right. Gosh, yeah. So shoulder injuries in men's gymnastics, there's some overuse there. There's also some traumatic injury stuff where you'll see like separated AC joints. You'll see dislocated shoulders. You'll see, bicep tears and pec tears. You'll see the big traumatic stuff. But then certainly you just see a lot of overuse things as well, where you just get some cranky shoulders just because you don't have enough, what Thomas was talking about, you need good mobility through your chest to do men's gymnastics. But men's gymnastics, everything is, or it seems like 80% of stuff is forward, right? So when I got done with men's gymnastics, I looked like a caveman walking around. My chest was so far forward and my chest was so tight, my upper back was so tight. And so if I'm here, well, then my shoulder blade is tipped forward. I have less space now for my rotator cuff. My labrum is put on stress on the front part of it. There's all sorts of like good reasons to not be in that terrible position. And men's gymnastics really adapts you well to this. And finally it took so I went through 16 years of men's gymnastics, right? And then I went through 3 years of grad school where literally you just sit in one classroom almost the whole day, like 6 to 8 hours a day, and they rotate the teacher into you. You don't switch classes like you do in undergrad. You sit there and the teacher, and then the next teacher comes in, and then the next teacher comes in, and you get a 10-minute break where you just like go outside and feel the sunshine for once. But you just sit for like 6 or 8 hours a day until you have lab or something. And so by the time I was done with grad school, my last clinical rotation, my instructor, my PT that I was under, he was like, Ian, good grief, man. Like, you have got to work on that. And now I can stand with good posture, and I get on to my kids all the time about posture. But man, I was just stuck here. And being in that position is so hard on the shoulder. So yeah, so making sure, as far as, going to your next question, I'm sure how to prevent it, right? But making sure that upper back and the shoulders are going to move well. Men's gymnastics, like the amount of hanging that we do and the amount of pushing and pulling we do on the shoulders, the chance of the shoulders being tight is way, way smaller than even women's gymnastics, where people have tight shoulders. It's almost always going to be that upper back and chest that's tight.
What do coaches need to be doing to keep that mobility as they go on? Because obviously, like as they get older and their bodies start changing, like we're going to be building more strength. So that mobility will be more important then too.
Yeah, absolutely. And so just an easy one, right? My favorite one is put your shoulder blades on a foam roller, hands behind the head, elbows in, and then just lean back over the foam roller just as far as you can possibly go, come back up. As far as you possibly can go, come back up, and just get that upper back to move. The human body, anyone that's been around teenagers knows the human body is naturally lazy. So it's always going to take the easy way out whenever possible. And so the spine is one of these things where it has really easy parts of the spine to move and really hard parts of the spine to move. But the whole spine needs to move for gymnastics. And so we can't just let the easy parts take over. And so what I mean by that is the thoracic spine, that upper back where it gets really, really tight, is tight for a reason. Like you got your heart and your lungs in there. So it's kind of important, right? So when the ribs come around and attach to the back of the spine, you have like 4 to 6 joints per segment going on through those 12 segments. That's a ton of joints. That's a ton of stuff that stabilizes and helps move and all that, right? And now in the lower back, you have 2 joints per segment. And so, and you have 5 segments. So it's much, much easier to let the lower back take over and not move the upper back. So you'll see men do handstands and they'll be closed in their shoulders, right? And their lower back will have this arch to it. And that could be because of tight wrists. It could be because of a tight upper back. It could be a little bit of both, which is likely, but we need to make sure that they can open all the way up and really extend that upper back, because if they don't, the body is it's not going to do it on its own. It's going to choose the easy way out and use the lower back or use these loose shoulders that don't have a lot of attachment.
Those are obviously all fantastic things. I probably could benefit from a bit more knowledge in that area. I should become a doctor, Ian. And
That's right.
my-
Just
just
you
do
got
that. And then my gymnast will be healthy then. At least for me, with what I have to work with, and what I've learned from just purely my experience so far, I do a lot of rotator stretches, where on your stomach out in a T, arms out in a T, and we'll lean to one side, we'll lean to the other, do a 90-degree arm angle and lean that way, and just get a lot of stretching in here. Lots of German hangs on the wall bar, things like that. Just continuing to get that chest flexibility increase, because it shows up in a lot of places, like you said too. So yeah, for me it's just a lot of stretching. I want to try that roller one. I think that'd be a good idea and something I'd like to try and implement into my program.
Yeah, and the reason why I bring that one up is because people aren't doing it. People are doing their rotator cuff stretches, and they're doing their chest stuff, and they're doing their biceps and lats with all that. But a lot of times they don't even know to do that one. And so that one will all of a sudden increase things really significantly and really quickly just because they haven't done it before. So coaches, for the most part, are doing an excellent job stretching all the muscles. So let's just mobilize that upper back, those joints, and man, see the results after that for sure.
So when we're talking about athlete longevity, I think this is really important for a lot of people to hear. We can start protecting wrists and shoulders early. They're going to be stronger, healthier, and they're going to just last longer and enjoy the sport a lot more. So smarter training plans, reach out to people like Ian if you need some help. Focus on recovery strategies. So if this episode helps you reflect on your own habits, let us know. And if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with anyone who could benefit. So thank you for joining us here at the NGA podcast. And until next time, stay happy, healthy, and high performing.